Cape Cod Broadcasting weaves the listening environments of 99.9 WQRC, Ocean 104.7, WFCC Classical 107.5, Cape Country 104, and CapeCon.com's website experience to reflect the lifestyles of the people who live, work, and play on Cape Cod. We hope that you enjoy this podcast.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. I'm here in the studio with Ian Ryan, who is a Democrat running for election in the 1st Barnstable District to replace Cleon Turner, who is retiring from office. He has 2 challengers in the primary coming up on September 9th. The primary will determine which of them will appear on the general election ballot in November. Ian, welcome to the show.
Thank you very much for having me.
Let's start with your background. Tell us a little about yourself, how long you've been on Cape Cod, what brought you here, and what you do for a living.
Well, I came back to the Cape in 1999, and since I've been working in the hospitality industry. My family has a 50-room resort in Dennisport that keeps us pretty busy. And in the meantime, I've also had the good fortune to send myself back to school, to law school, and I have a private law practice specializing in family law mediation and commercial mediation as well. I came back in 1999 after a 10-year break. My parents actually moved to the Cape in 1989, and like many young people, I took one look around and got out of here. Something we should endeavor to change. Joined the Army. I spent 6 years in the Military Intelligence Corps as a Korean linguist, and spent 4 years doing odd jobs. I worked as an import broker for a while and for the Boeing company as an instructional designer before moving back to the Cape to help with my parents who were getting a little older. So that's me, and that's where I come from. What else can I tell you?
Well, let's start with your political philosophy and why you decided to get into politics.
Well, you may know that Cleon Turner, the current holder of the 1st Barnstable seat, is the first Democrat to hold it since the Civil War. And we worked very hard to get him in there. He's done excellent work. He's laid an excellent foundation, really changed our district from being sort of a backbench to really being an opinion leader in the legislature. And I would like to keep it that way. We have an important voice. And the Cape, and the Mid-Cape in particular, has unique problems and unique gifts that we can bring to the legislature. Among them are the school funding formula that has to work for us as well as for the urban areas in Massachusetts, wastewater management plan that we've got to start addressing. We're already late, and transportation that's got to work for us today as well as in the future.
Now, have you held any other offices in politics or served on any committees on the local level?
Politics is new for me. I'm really coming from the business community, and I have worked as volunteers and in nonprofit boards and things like that. I've been a director of the Dennis Chamber of Commerce. I've been president of Cape Rep Theater in Brewster, something I'm very proud of. A fantastic organization helping people make art where they live, something I couldn't be prouder of. But no, politics is new, and it's been a baptism by fire, certainly.
Now, you've mentioned some of the big issues here on the Cape, the young people leaving the region, the school funding formula, wastewater. Talk a little bit more about the big issues here on the Cape and what you think you could do, how you could influence them if you were elected as state rep.
Well, again, it's building on the foundation that Cleon laid for us. He's given us an opportunity to really launch ourselves forward in a progressive way. In terms of school funding, we have a school funding formula that arbitrarily bases local contribution to schools. Half of its basis is on property value, half of its basis is on income, and that does very well for urban areas and not very well at all for rural or regional school districts like we have here in the district. The legislator's looking at that for the first time this year in almost 20. I think since 1994 was the last time I looked at it. So it's time to run in there knowing what you're talking about and to make sure that the new school funding formula, when they come up with it, works for rural school districts, not just rural and regional school districts, not just for the cities of New Bedford, Lawrence, for example.
Now, being from Dennis, school funding, a big issue with Dennis Yarmouth. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, that's been bandied back and forth. And one thing that's clear is that the local funding formula has to get fixed between the two boards of selectmen and the school district. It's not something a state representative can do except as sort of a bully pulpit. And I hope my experience as a mediator would help everyone to come to the table and understand that everyone has the same interest, which is educating the district's children, and that in having our civil discourse be totally consumed with this argument about how little we can do for schools is really keeping us from having a conversation about how well we're doing for schools. And that's something I'd like to see change.
Now, you mentioned about young people leaving the Cape and that you were one of them at one time. Let's talk about that issue. What would you do to solve that problem?
Well, Cape Cod Young Professionals has just come out with a report about population change, and the focus has been on young people leaving the Cape. And when I read that report, the good news I saw was that the number of retired people is not growing on the Cape. We sort of developed this narrative where retired people are driving young people away, but that's not actually the case. So if we can solve the problems that young people face, the two things you face when you're a young person are good wages and affordable housing, you're also solving the same things that retirees need to face, which is decent income and housing. So if we can solve that for one group, we'll solve it for everybody.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal. We're focused on politics with the upcoming primary election on September 9th. I'm talking with Ian Ryan. He has two Democrat challengers in the primary on September 9th. What distinguishes you from the other Democrats in this race?
Well, I think my experience is broader, not just here locally on the Cape as a business owner in the hospitality industry and also in the year-round legal services industry. I've got a perspective on both of those. But also because of my past, I've sort of lived through what has become writ large in our local sort of political narrative. I feel like I've done everything right and still found myself locked out of the economy. You know, as a veteran, I found myself unemployed and relying on what were called food stamps at the time and what are called SNAP benefits now. And it didn't seem right to me that I could do everything right and still find myself locked out. You know, we have an unemployment system that rewards people for applying for jobs that may not be there anymore. We've got a retraining system that will only let them receive educational support for about half the time it takes to actually finish a degree that could lift them up out of working poverty. You know, I have personal experience with the idea that in a balanced economy, there shouldn't be anything called the working poor. People who work for a living deserve not just to work, but to make a living. And that's been a very real personal experience for me. And I've gone from the very painful experience of having to reach out to help from others to being a successful business person and an employer. So having that whole range of experience, I think, sets me apart from my two challengers.
Now, you mentioned earlier in the interview the wastewater issue on Cape Cod, such a huge issue regionally. What are your thoughts on how the region is trying to deal with that issue?
I think that the Cape Cod Commission, although it has sort of a terrible brand image, has done a really good job as a planning agency at putting together this 208 plan, which you can see on their website. It breaks down the problem regionally, yes, but also watershed by watershed. And in the three watersheds we have here in the district, there are solutions that are standard, you know, sewering systems, but also innovative systems like using shellfishing and alternative composting toilets and fertigation plants to try and get the nitrogen out of the water. This is not an issue where it's a prospective problem. It's a problem right now. It's really an issue of whether we push it right up to the limit. And once we reach a tipping point, that's it. We'll start talking about dead zones and not nitrogen loading. And we need to work right now to make it happen. As a region, we're not going to be able to afford it. The cost estimates are something like $3.8 billion over 50 years. So we really need a competent, persuasive advocate in the State House to make sure that every single funding source is brought to bear and it's not just a property tax burden.
Another big issue in the region, renewable energy. Your thoughts on that? I
think it's really exciting. You know, Massachusetts is one of the few states where you can actually, and we're approaching cost equity, where it can cost as much to create your own energy through solar as it can to buy it from a utility company. It's really brilliant. It's something we're using at the hotel. We're looking at right now and installing it. And because we're seasonal, we could actually be producing power for half the year and only using it for half the year. I'm behind it in every single way. It's really exciting.
Another big issue people talk about all the time here, crime and drugs, the dangers of addiction and what that does to our community character and culture. Your thoughts on that?
We have got to start treating addiction like a public health crisis and stop treating it like a criminal justice problem. If we can address things through a medical and social perspective, we'll actually start solving the problem. Things like drug courts and diversion programs are much more effective than incarceration. Massachusetts is looking at spending over $1 billion just to build prisons that aren't going to solve the problem. We need to start building hospitals instead. Start using programs like drug courts and diversion to try and really rescue a generation from what is, frankly, a prescription drug problem that's growing into an illegal drug problem. And we need to start talking about that in terms, again, as a public health problem, not as a criminal justice problem.
And with the minute or so left, any final thoughts you'd like to leave with voters about when they think of Ian Ryan? What should they think of?
Well, I think that it's a really exciting time to build on the foundation that Cleon Turner's built for us, to take that legacy forward and make sure that the 1st Barnstable District remains an opinion leader in the legislature. And I think I have the experience and the willingness to do that, to really put myself out there, have difficult conversations from a broad base of experience. So I hope they'll be voting for me on September 9th, and I look forward to having a conversation with anyone in the meantime. Thank you.
And unfortunately, we are out of time. Ian, thank you so much for coming in.
Great. Thank you for having me again, and I'll see you on September 9th.
I'm Laura Reckford, and this is Sunday Journal.
This podcast is a presentation of Cape Cod Broadcasting, which is solely responsible for its content. Thank you for listening. For more information, please visit us at capecodbroadcasting.com.